Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Pain Free for Life podcast. In today's episode, I'm joined by my good friend and colleague, Dr. Keith Scott-Mumby. Qualified in medicine, the same as a medical doctor in Manchester, UK in 1970, Keith almost immediately began research into controversial, at the time, alternative medicine. He started the first successful food and environmental allergy clinic in 1979, and this spread to London, Glasgow, Dublin, and Stockholm. These were exciting days in which he made many new discoveries. Keith made medical legal history in 1986 when a UK Crown Court accepted his evidence that food allergy was capable of making a youth murderously violent. The story actually got 20 minutes of Channel 4 News. The youth was given a conditional release, the condition being that he stick to Keith's recommended diet. By 1990, the press were calling him Britain's #1 allergy detective, and he's published several books in this field and has been interviewed by the BBC and TV and radio stations all around the world as a recognized expert in alternative health paradigms. More recently, he's gone into other areas as well and started to search for answers as to why an individual gets allergies in the first place. These answers have led him into homotoxicology, which is complex homeopathy, electrodermal screening using computers, the Chinese model, and essentially allied him to a Western technological database as well. Keith Mumby now writes and lectures internationally on themes of energetic medicine and the new anti-aging science, which is his current forte. He wrote the book Virtual Medicine to bring science and validation to this field and the technology it has spawned. In 2005, he was appointed professor of energy medicine at the Capital University of Integrative Medicine and professor of nutrition at the Open International University for Complementary Medicines in the USA. In today's episode, Keith and I discuss a very important topic, and that's his latest book, Virus Blitz. I believe everyone should have a copy of this book on their shelves. This is the essential Bible as to how to beat viruses. We talk about viruses themselves. We talk about how to fight them off naturally, very important. We talk about their connection to cancers and dive into post-viral fatigue syndrome. And yes, we cover COVID-19 as well. So there's lots to unpack in this episode. I hope you enjoy.
Welcome back to Pain Free for Life, where we share how to successfully overcome all kinds of chronic and extreme conditions to live happy, productive, pain-free lives forever. And now, here's your host, co-founder, and board-certified holistic healthcare practitioner, Dr. Rob Vanbergen.
All right, Keith, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. It's always good fun to be with you, actually, Rob. We've been friends for so long, and people can't stop us talking once we get together. So this is going to be fun.
It is going to be fun. And, as I said, we're going to do this for as long as it takes to get through this topic. This is a big topic. It's very important. It's been important to people, more important, I'd say, in recent years. It's kind of come to people's attention. But today we're talking about viruses. And I remember doing my biology classes, and one of the things is with viruses, people are like, are viruses living? Are they dead? What are they? There's a lot of controversy around viruses. As someone who's written a book on viruses, possibly the book on viruses, what would you describe a virus to be?
Well, right in the beginning of the book, you may remember, Rob, I shared a joke that goes back to my days in medical school, which was a long time ago. A virus is a piece of bad news wrapped in protein. And I think that sums it up beautifully, really. But it is a very strange, in fact, some people don't even think that viruses cause disease. Rudolf Steiner, the German philosopher, he was quite adamant that they're the result of the disease, not the cause of the disease. However, I'm not going to be that controversial. There are small amounts of RNA or DNA that's wrapped in a package, an outer coating, which is very relevant because that's where you find things like the spike protein. And it can hurt you. Now, I'm actually interested in whether viruses are intentional. They're hanging around, as it were, and then they suddenly decide to get in a cell and, make things happen. Why? Is there actually an intentional consciousness there? I'm one of these people that thinks the entire universe is conscious, so why not? But they remain extremely mysterious. Some of them dangerous and deadly. But to pretend that we're all scientific and we've got electron microscopes and now we know all about viruses, it's just baloney. We are ignorant, almost to the point of being helpless. Not quite, but almost.
Yeah, that kind of like a mystery still to this day, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we do know, they're being photographed. They're terribly tiny, much smaller than bacteria. And they've got no, communicating or networking system, which bacteria have. Bacteria have something called quorum sensing. There's a bunch of them hang out in the tonsils. They all know that each other's there. So they say, let's get to work on this. But viruses have no such phenomenon. And yet they can raise such devilish mischief, almost, well, I was going to say almost satanic. That was a joke. But of course, a lot of people wouldn't take it as a joke. They say, oh, yeah, satanic.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, then there's lots of different viruses out there. I mean, there's the common cold and things like that, but there's obviously far more insidious viruses than that. What would you say are some of the most kind of horrible, terrible viruses of doom?
I did a top 10 for the book, and there's no question, rabies is the number one. It's like just about 101% fatal if symptoms once develop. So you're in big trouble if you get bitten by a rabid animal. You have a short window of time in which to run, don't walk, to the nearest ER and demand a rabies vaccine. Now, I'm not anti-vax at all. There are vaccines that work. I've often said I'm very happy that there's a vaccine for rabies in the world. Because, getting on for 60,000 people a year die of rabies, and it's horrible. It's called hydrophobia. The person has a raging thirst, but they're terrified of water. If you hand them a glass of water, they leap back as if it was a red-hot coal or something, and the person expires, very, very rapidly after that. It's an awful disease, and there's less that, in all of history, there's less than a dozen people, I think, ever survived it once the symptoms develop. So that's my number one. Now, number two, I think unquestionably would be Ebola. We keep hearing about that, don't we? And there are all sorts of strains, but the Zaire one is like about 90% fatal. And that's a horrible way to go too. It's like your insides liquefy and turn to blood, and the person coughs blood and sneezes blood and, passing it from the rectum and everything. It's like dissolving inside. It's horrible. It really is. And the Marburg is similar, but not quite so violent. It's on average, it's about 50% fatal, but can be up to 85 or more % fatal. These are the real sort of heavy, horrible hitters, and we wouldn't like them in the world at all, but they are, unfortunately. And then you can sort of take your pick. I mean, there's quite a few of those. They're called hemorrhagic viruses, where you just bleed out and die. But dengue is one that's worth mentioning. That's pretty horrible. It's nicknamed break bone fever because the person feels like every bone in their body's broken. It's agony, but it's not that commonly fatal. Nowhere near like the other diseases in terms of fatality. But if you go to the tropics, you need to know. Is dengue a feature? Do I need to get a vaccine, get a protection, and so on? So dengue is definitely on the list. But the other one probably worth mentioning, like I say, there are 10 in all in the book. But the hantavirus. Now, I lost a very good friend, a very dear friend to that. I was in France at the time. Otherwise, I don't know what I could have done maybe to help him. But its name comes from the Hantan River in Vietnam, and it was brought back by American GIs from Vietnam. And it really first raised its head among the Navajo Indian. The young Navajos were dying like flies. And it turned out to be this hantavirus. It's moved around. The vector is what we call it a vector. It's a mouse, what's it called? The kangaroo mouse, yeah, that hops around. And that already the Navajos have a tradition. If one of these mice cross a blanket or a piece of clothing, you burn it. It's far too risky. So these are some of the fearful ones, but of course they're not all that bad. I mean, having a cold is annoying. The flu is quite a bit more serious, but Thank God they're not all deadly like that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, hantavirus is one that has actually, it scares me. It's a scary one. And I know it's really quite rare in Canada, but still to this day, I caught a mouse in my barbecue. I was ready to burn the whole barbecue. My wife was like, "What are you doing, Rob? Like, there's a very limited chance there's any problem here." But I was like, "It's nesting in there." And I took it far, freaking out about it. So there really are some incredibly nasty viruses out there.
Yeah.
And then, as you said,
and of course, that colors people's reaction, doesn't it? A virus equals nasty, horrible.
Yeah.
They're not all like that. I mean, we have lots of onboard virus. The microbiome story. I think most lay people even understand what that is these days. But there's all kinds of, protozoa, single cell organisms, bacteria, and viruses down in our gut, and they bring along their DNA and their RNA as well. So they're part of this picture of what we call the microbiome. And they're clearly not hurting us, but we want a healthy microbiome, and if that means including a few good guy viruses, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, exactly. So not all viruses are bad. There's some benefit to them, and then obviously there's the scary ones. Now, in the book, you say that one family of viruses in particular gives us way more trouble than the rest, right?
Yes, absolutely. These are not so horrible, but they've got some attitude towards humans. We're going to get them humans kind of viruses. It's the herpes group. Yes. We know cold sores and genital herpes. I mean, these are only part of the story, and it's pretty scary actually. 1 in 2 people have the cold sore. The cold sore. I nearly said coleslaw. I think I was got food on my mind. Have the cold sore virus, and 1 in 2, 1 in 8 have H is called a herpes simplex virus 2, which is the genital herpes.
Yeah.
1 in 8, Rob. That's a pretty, it's something I never even heard of when I was at medical school. I think we weren't switched onto it even then. But in fact, maybe it's because of us back in the 60s being promiscuous and having free love and all that got this thing out of the box. Anyway, it's definitely out of the box now. But there are some other surprising ones. Herpes zoster, the one thing that causes chickenpox and shingles, that's in the herpes family too. Epstein-Barr, I think everyone's heard of that one. If not, you should have. For many years, that was the chief suspect for post-viral fatigue syndrome, chronic fatigue syndrome, those things. It was, it's bad news. And herpes number 5 is cytomegalovirus. That's another nasty one. Particularly dangerous for immune-compromised people, like kiddies, people doing chemo, or people with HIV infection. So this is a family that we have to reckon with. We live with them, but it's a very you can't say a truce. It's a very troubled battlefield, but, on the whole, we keep it at bay. But it's outstanding that this one family should be so much trouble to humans, man.
Yeah. I mean, you get people like get these viruses and then they kind of seem to have them for life, right? They can come back up. They keep reappearing whenever they choose. Like, is there an underlying reason for that, or are all viruses, once they've been in our body once, are they present to a degree that they could potentially come back?
I think on the whole, yes, we don't shed them so easily at all. There is, we speak these days of stealth pathogens. Back in the 70s and 80s, when I first started on this, we used to call them smoldering viruses, which I think is a good, it's like smoldering embers. If you throw some fuel on, bang, it will explode again and burst into flame. It's a bit like that. And Epstein-Barr, in fact, is one of the absolute classic viruses of the stealth pathogen variety. It sits there lurking. We believe that it's capable of causing certain cancers like liver cancer. It can certainly undermine your liver health all through your life. I had this disease called glandular fever. I had it when I was 17. I was bright yellow. I'm pretty ill. I was in hospital for a while. They told me when I came out, that watch your liver. You're going to have lifetime trouble with your liver. Don't drink alcohol. Well, I didn't listen much to that, and I've been all right since. But I'm pretty sure this beast is in there, just waiting for me to slip up one day.
Yeah.
And that's so stealth pathogens, I think, are very good. They're not all viruses. There's, some bacteria are like that too. But they get in below the radar, as it were, and the body can't throw them out because it doesn't really know they're there.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, you mentioned that this one in particular has been, they believe can cause liver cancer. Are there other viruses that can cause different kinds of cancers that people should be concerned about?
I have a friend, he's passed, unfortunately, lovely man, who said, I think, a doctor, he said, I think in the course of time, we'll find that all cancers are caused by viruses. And I must say, the list is growing. Maybe he's right. The very first one was discovered by a British doctor called Dennis Burkitt. And I was very lucky enough to meet him and listen to a lecture by him. And it was called Burkitt's lymphoma. And it turned out to be caused by a virus. It was very prevalent in Africa. And it was, a huge discovery. Think about it. A virus that you could just breathe in or pick up on your fingertips can cause cancer. I mean, whoa, that is a scary thought if you think about it. But you have to get infected in some way. So our immune system is very good at defending and protecting us. But once the virus gets past your defense system, then some of these are capable of causing cancer. Another well-known one is the human papilloma virus, which can cause cancer in women. But that's a kind of misnomer in a way, because you can get, in the mouth, in the liver, all kinds of different organs can have cancer caused by the papilloma virus.
Yeah. So, it can really just hit you from anywhere. All these different viruses can cause all of these problems. And of course, there's got to be a part of that is the creation of the inflammation in the body from the viruses, right, that can contribute to cancer.
That's right, yeah. And this, as you well know, the slow inflammation is more deadly than something fierce and horrible and nasty and making you cough or go bright red. It's the one you don't know about that is scary.
It is. And speaking of scary, so the thing that's caused fear over years and years and years, obviously a virus, or at least that's how it's being defined. What about COVID-19? Where do you stand on that?
Well, I guess I should sidestep the whole idea of, is it a laboratory manufactured item? I think the evidence points to the fact that it is, but, you can get yourself practically arrested for saying that. Yeah. And they're doing everything they can to put up the smoke screen. The point is, this is the important point, Rob, is wherever it came from, if it was started deliberately, whatever, the point is, it is here. And it's quite an unpleasant beast. And the response to it has been absolutely disastrous. This might not have been such a bad virus. I mean, heck, people, tens of thousands die of influenza every year.
Yeah.
For 40 years, I've been teaching influenza is not your common cold. Influenza is a killer disease. It's kind of a culling. It takes out the old folks that are weak and not well nourished. I mean, for centuries, it's been culling out weak human beings. Influenza is deadly. I don't think COVID-19 is any worse than that. But, once you start adding in this mad vaccine that we experimental mRNA manufacturing and fooling around, not knowing what you're doing, no proper safety. The whole thing has become a bloodbath. And I came across a few days ago some figures from the Office of Statistics in Britain. And basically, when you take these figures apart, it actually emerges that 2 people are going to die of the vaccine or the treatment for every 1 person you save from COVID-19. Well, it doesn't make sense, does it? But it ceased to be a scientific thing. They closed the science down on day one. Nobody's allowed to say anything we don't want to say, anything that threatens profits. If you want clear proof that Big Pharma has governments and politicians absolutely totally in its pocket, there's clear proof. The mass enforced vaccination programs serve nobody any good except the pharmaceutical companies. And, after 3 years of putting up with this baloney, Rob, they said, well, of course it doesn't stop you getting COVID. That was the whole rationale behind mandatory vaccination programs. It's to protect everybody.
Yeah.
Although why somebody who's had a vaccine that works need protecting from somebody that hasn't had a vaccine, that's a bit beyond me. But, we could talk for 2 hours about the COVID mess. And it's made a mess by politicians, self-serving groups, and big pharma and its greed. It has nothing to do with the scientific status of this little virus.
Yeah. Yeah. I've seen my wife worked in the hospital during COVID as a nurse, and she said, and we're in a small town here. We're not in a big town, small hospital. There's like 50 beds max. But in her short time there, before she decided, before they made vaccines mandatory, to work in hospitals, she saw 2 patients come in that had developed Guillain-Barré syndrome from the vaccine. Like that was
Right.
it. And the doctors wrote it on the charts and they reported it and it went nowhere. Right. And it was, what you're saying just resonates so much. It really does make sense. COVID-19 in and of itself, most people that got it, it was a rough virus, sure, but they moved through it, right? And they were okay on the other side.
Yeah, like you live through flu, you just go to bed, you take some aspirins. I don't recommend aspirin. I'm just saying this is what people do. You drink hot toddies and watch TV for a few days. You get over it.
Yeah.
People weren't allowed to get over it. They were shipped off to care homes and they were put on ventilators, which did no good.
Yeah.
In fact, probably hurt people. Anyway, as I say, we could talk for hours.
We could. Maybe that's
for case.
Yeah. I was gonna say maybe that's a topic for a different episode. So today I want to talk a little bit more about viruses in general, right? So of the big focus. Now, obviously, our immune system is the thing that keeps us safe from viruses, and we know we can help to boost our immune system in a bunch of different ways. We do microcurrent. We've got vitamins, what sort of things do you recommend to generally boost your immune system to kind of help fight off viruses?
Right. Well, I'd call your attention to my saying, any good health measure is an antiviral measure. Mm-hmm. You can build up your body's strength and vitality. You can become almost bomb-proof to anything, cancers, bacteria, viruses, parasites. And that's the truth of it. So all the good things that we all know, these are very important to us. Stress is still one of the number one precipitating factors for any illness. And in fact, I have a saying, Rob, that the flu, coughs, colds, and those things, the cause isn't a virus, it's a sudden shock or loss. And you try this in the coming winter, if you remember. You perhaps forget in the meantime. But when winter comes around and somebody says, I just got a horrible cold, you say, did you have any significant loss or a sudden emotional shock? 19 out of 20 times, the person will be well aware of it and say, oh, yeah, well, of course, my dad died or, made redundant, whatever. Those are the real cause. So, I do believe in the germ theory of disease, meaning it takes a certain germ to get a certain illness. But just having the germs is not enough. It's not going to hurt you unless something compromises the immune system. So anything that works against stress is good. Pilates and yoga, anything relaxation, this lovely forest bathing where you go and walk through the forest. And Herbert Benson's relaxation technique, that's the absolute 180 degrees opposite of flight or fight. It's the other way around. It's instead of a sympathetic nerve nightmare, you switch onto parasympathetic mode, which is like, eat, sleep, relax, chill, that kind of mode of being. And it's very simple. You don't need to do mystical meditations. You could, in fact, what's it called? The Maharishi's thing. I've forgotten the name of his specialty, but transcendental meditation, wasn't it? They give you some little mantra you're supposed to say. Herbert Benson proved that you get exactly the same response by just saying anything. Just say one, as in the number one, and you just keep chanting that over. It has just the same effect as some mystical meditation thing. It's rather wonderful, and the body does respond, and you can measure it all physiologically. Heart rate slows, blood pressure drops, all the cortisol diminishes, all the good things happen inside your body if you take the trouble to work at de-stressing yourself. And forest bathing is easy if you're not technical, but Benson's technique is very good if you have the time and trouble and learn what to do.
Okay.
And of course, you can put an Avatia on, plug yourself into an alpha state,
And calm
clip
it.
it on your ear, clip it on your ears, and away you go.
Yeah.
Nothing more relaxing than being in alpha. In fact, that's what relaxation means, isn't it? Really,
Yeah.
alpha. Yeah.
Alpha. Exactly. So, yeah, in general, I think in the book you developed what you called a dirty dozen of holistic remedies, right?
Yeah, well, of course, there was a movie of that name. You might remember. I can't remember. It
Yeah.
was.
Yeah.
It was, yeah, it's quite a gripping war movie. And so the word dirty dozen was on my mind. I mean, there's nothing dirty about these remedies, of course. But I picked, what I thought were 12 of the, some of everybody knows, vitamin C, vitamin D. A lot of people forget vitamin A, although that's an extremely powerful immune thing too. What about, things like ozone? Everyone knows if you take zinc, it stops the viruses, but it doesn't actually. Zinc on its own does nothing. You have to have a substance called an ionophore, which will get the zinc into the cells. And at that point, it works. So I pretty soon realized I was getting on for a dozen of these things. In fact, the last one I put in was methylene blue. You might know that from school lab work, where you dye things with it. But in fact, it's got extraordinary properties: antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, antiviral, antibacterial. It's really good at calming and chilling you mentally and relaxing. Absolutely, I can say absolutely non-toxic, but it's one of the most untoxic substances known. The only complication when you take it is not side effects, is you dye your mouth blue. Your pee comes out blue, but I mean, honestly, that's a very small price to pay, isn't it? And I put that very high on the list of what I do. I've never had COVID. I've never had the shot, never had COVID. But if I did, I think I'd start. I've got some methylene blue at the house in France. So if I'm in France, I'll just pull it out of the cupboard and take some. It's so simple and easy to do. Absolutely. So I had this, this dozen remedies, and I hope, we'll get time to perhaps talk about some of these. But eventually, I realized that I wanted to add Nigella sativa. Maybe I could talk about it at this point.
Yeah.
Because it's such a tremendous remedy. And if I found the page, and I'm not sure if I could find it real quick. But there's pages and pages of, listen, I know the people are listening, of course, won't be able to see the book, but I'm reading from the book. So reduces knee arthritis, improves menopausal symptoms, good for polycystic ovaries, stabilizes mood and brings calmness. It's a major treatment for depressive disorder, good for attention and memory, helps with epilepsy, improves nasal dryness, oral cavity ulcers, treatment for insomnia, improved irritable bowel. There are pages and pages of things, this wonderful remedies that this thing can do, and one of which, by the way, is it knocks off viruses. So, it's been around for thousands of years. It enjoys enormous prestige. And the Muslim community love to quote the fact that the Prophet Muhammad, reputedly anyway, said it's the cure for everything except death. We can't cure that, but if you otherwise take Nigella sativa. So I thought, I've got to have this one in my book. So it was number 13. Well, you may know, because Canada's ultimately British, isn't it? That in the old days, we used to talk about a baker's dozen, which was 13. Dozen is 12, a baker's dozen is 13. The law was interesting. If you were a baker and shortchanged somebody, you got very severe punishments. So they used to put in 13 just to be sure. And that was the origin of the expression in Britain, a baker's dozen. So I now have 13. To be honest, I could rewrite the whole book and have top 50 viral remedies.
Yeah.
Rob, it'd be easy. But it's a kind of priority. Certainly this dozen or so. These are the biggies, the ones that you would want to have in your medicine cabinet, frankly. Yeah, that's
So let's talk through a few of them. We talk about the Nigella sativa, but one of the ones, obviously, vitamin C, is a very commonly known one. Do you think people do it right, though? Well, do you think...
Can I just tell you up? Gus, I just realized from what you said, I didn't quite finish Nigella, did I? But it's taken as Nigella seed, and you can eat spoons full of seeds. It's tiny black seed. In fact, it's called black seed. I've got Nigella growing in my garden in France. Or more often, it's taken as the oil, and it's called black seed oil. So those of you who picked up on that, that's what you want to go and ask for. Yeah, back to vitamin C. Well, vitamin C has enormous prestige. But doctors just, the average doctor just will not take it seriously as anything but a vitamin that will stop you getting scurvy. I think, 60 or 80 milligrams, 100 milligrams, wonderful, you'll never get scurvy. That's all they think of. But vitamin C has very powerful antioxidant, antimicrobial properties, anti-inflammatory, that all come in at much higher doses, grams. And the best way to share this with people, Rob, I usually do, is to say, well, a goat, most animals can make vitamin C, right? We lost the gene millions of years ago. But most furry animals can make their own vitamin C. And a goat makes about 10 or 12 grams a day. I'm about the size of a goat, I think. Well, my wife keeps calling me an old goat anyway. But honestly, weight-wise, so I reckon I need 10 grams a day. So even, forget even what Linus Pauling said, 2 grams a day. I think 10 grams a day is probably what we should be having. Now, significantly, lions, tigers, hyenas, camels don't get coughs and colds and viral diseases or cancers typically. Only when they're put on, formulated foods from humans.
Yes.
So I think that's probably what we should be taking. The trouble is, when you take vitamin C, it's very sour and gives you diarrhea. So I've carefully formulated a version of vitamin C that you can take, big scoops of, and it won't do that to you.
Yes.
And then that's when you start to be able to explore some of the magic. And if I very rarely go down with anything, but, once in a while, and if I go down with some kind of virus, I would take about 25 grams of vitamin C. That's 25,000 micrograms, not 100, which is what the doctor thinks, 25,000 micrograms of that. I'd take about 20,000 international units of vitamin D, 50,000 of vitamin D and about 20,000 of vitamin A. Slight caution with the vitamin A. If you're pregnant or might be during that time or become pregnant, don't do it because it can hurt the fetus. But otherwise, just for 3 days, you mustn't take it longer than that. But, vitamin A can become quite toxic. But it's a wonderful antiviral and antimicrobial too. So I take this great big bolus of stuff in one go and usually wake up next morning, it's all gone. It's in the book if somebody wants to look that up. So vitamin C, probably the greatest antiviral of them all, I would think. Yeah.
Very misused, I would say. But as you said, based on the general recommendations that people will say, oh, I'll take 50 milligrams a day and I'll be fine. Like, as you said, that's the bare minimum to not get scurvy, which you shouldn't get nowadays anyway, really.
Well, some people do, bleeding teeth, they're brushing their teeth and there's blood. Well, quite often that's just lack of vitamin C. But we're on the borderline. Almost everybody's on the borderline of shortage.
So, we could talk more through some of these as well, but I wanted to get into like the herbs as well beyond this. So there's some herbs as well that you would recommend?
Oh, yeah. There's some terrific ones. Some are, is it a herb or not? Pine needle tea. Surabin, it's called. That was brought to public attention by Judy Miskowitz, the pandemic lady.
Oh, yes.
She popularized that one. Is that herbal? It's from a tree, so I guess it is.
I guess it would be.
The famous ones are things like, echinacea and berberine. I must say, if I was severely ill with a virus infection, I wouldn't rely on echinacea. It's there, but it's not anywhere near as strong a performer as these other things that I've been talking about. So it's on the list, yes. Licorice has a much more powerful effect. But, berberine is it's not far from being like Nigella. It does so many things. We give it these days for diabetes, glucose control, as a weight loss agent, as well as its anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, antiviral, antibacterial status. Berberine is pretty wonderful too. Actually, berberine it's not a herb technically, it's an extract from a herb. It comes from things like golden seal and a few other plants. So berberine is actually the extract, but it's very human friendly, almost ridiculously non-toxic. And everyone should have that in the medicine cabinet, just ready for, if it's needed some rainy day.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
White tea extract works.
Which was that one? Sorry.
White tea.
White tea.
Long white tea. Green tea, not so much, funnily enough, in that context. What about, xylitol? This is not herb, is it? But xylitol, which is a sweetener, is very good at clearing viruses, especially oral viruses and bacteria. If you take that on a regular basis, then you keep a good, clean mouth. The mouth is the origin of a great deal of trouble. You're sitting there. I mean, listen, I don't want to offend anybody, but I've often joked that oral sex is a lot more hygienic than kissing somebody, kissing the mouth, I should say, because there's so many bugs in there and you're constantly swallowing them and breathing them. It's a very messy area. So taking xylitol, this kind of sweetener, which it definitely is scientifically shown to cleanse the mouth, is probably a very good thing too, especially if there is a virus going around. You're ready.
What do you think about, is it called elderberry extract? That's a popular one I see people talk about.
Oh, it makes me sick. Who the hell wants syrup?
It's very sweet.
Elderberry syrup. The last thing your immune system wants is sugar. This was shown back in the 80s. I remember the tests very well. If you swallow a couple of spoonsful of sugar, all the white cells in your body go dead and numb for about 6 hours. It's the stupidest thing you can do to eat sugar. So the idea of putting, elderberry syrup just makes me laugh. It's just ignorance.
I've seen people put elderberry tea, little bit less sweet, I would imagine, than the syrup to do that. But there's so many popular things, right, that are just fads made famous by the internet nowadays.
I've seen cancer cures. Just eat, asparagus. Just eat asparagus and it'll cure you. There's the weirdest stuff that goes around and around on the internet. Some person has some benefit somewhere and says, it was that, and then starts to blog it and people pick up on it. But the first problem is they may not even be correct about what it was that caused their recovery. The person was, let's say, take the asparagus case. The person eats only asparagus. It means you're doing an exclusion diet. You've given up milk, dairy, wheat, sugar, tea, coffee, red, all of those things. Giving up something could be the real reason the person cured his cancer. But he says, no, it's definitely something in the asparagus that did it. It's a wonderful vegetable. Everyone should eat it. And all this baloney gets, it drives me daft because I'm scientific enough, and I mean scientific. There's a lot of pseudoscience hogwash out there, mostly from supposed scientists like Big Pharma. But, there has to be some kind of method. Otherwise, it all just gets out of hand and it just becomes another kind of false information that misleads people.
Well, let's use that as a segue into ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, because these became very popular during COVID.
Hugely so. And, it's kind of sinister. I live in Nevada, as you know, and the governor of Nevada was blocking the importation of hydroxychloroquine into Nevada in the first days of the pandemic. First of all, what the hell has it got to do with a politician? Why is it his damn business? None at all. But obviously he'd been got at and told to block the importation of this, and quite a few other state governors too. I found it quite sinister. The campaign against these two substances has been beyond creepy and weird. Ivermectin has been in the USP, that's the US Pharmacopoeia, for decades. Safe for humans and used for all kinds of things, particularly parasites. And yet the first thing they did was trot some shill jerk out and put him on TV saying, ivermectin, that's just horse worming, Paddy, you're not a horse. To try and discredit it with the public. And yet it's in the human pharmacopoeia. So obviously it's big pharma trying to block the competition. That's what it's all about. But I do have a twist on this, Rob, which is, everyone's passionate about these two. They're being attacked by the authorities, therefore they must be good. Actually, ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine are both pharmaceutical drugs. Did you ever think that?
I don't think people did, because you're right, they became these flagship protective things that everyone that normally is against big pharma is now all of a sudden for, simply because they're being blocked, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, taking chloroquine as an anti-malarial, for example, that's pretty unpleasant stuff. But anyway, they did become elevated to almost sublime, divine. And there's something going around on the internet that says if you're attacked by authorities, it must be good. They wouldn't attack you if it didn't work.
Yeah.
There might be something to that, I guess. Yeah,
it's possible. It's possible. Okay, so now there's a section in the book on post-viral fatigue syndrome, which is sort of like long COVID, right? So can you explain what it is and what we can do about it? Because I know that that's a big problem for a lot of people.
it is. It's huge, and the problem is the medical profession. Let's start by laying out the condition. A person has a viral disease and just doesn't shake it off so well, and sometimes the viral illness can be very unpleasant, and the after effects can be extremely unpleasant and go on for years. The person feels tired and debilitated. They get depressed, and it's really quite horrible for them. The answer from the orthodox medical profession has been to poo-poo it. These are just weak-minded people. They're trying to attract attention. I put a quote in the book from a British journal where some smart aleck doctor said, all these people need is a pair of running shoes and some antidepressants. In other words, get on your feet, don't be lazy. But what was very obvious to me back in the 80s, because I started seeing lots of these patients, was that the exercise itself makes the person ill. It's almost like they were allergic to exercise. Now, I know that sounds silly, but what I mean is if a person goes for, I'm going to work my way through this, I'm determined, I'm going jogging every day, the white cell count in their blood explodes just like they're carrying an infection or a huge allergic reaction. So it's not such a silly idea to think in terms of allergy to exercise, or reactants anyway to exercise. In the late 80s, the European Union came out with, I think it was the WHO spearheaded that, saying it's real. You've got to take it seriously. These people really are ill. But in most of the world, the doctors continued to berate these people, to belittle them and sneer at them, and they couldn't do anything anyway. They were useless. They weren't able to treat it. So it was kind of, in a way, ashamed of their own negative position. But doctors were very rough on patients and still are. Yeah. Now, so along comes long COVID, which is really, more or less the same thing. You have a viral disease and afterwards you feel crap and you stay feeling that way. Sometimes indefinitely. Sometimes it's 6 months or 12 months and the person gradually improves, but often not, because the medical profession is going about it the wrong way, as I said. First of all, let me use a phrase that I got from a good friend of mine in England. She said it's mitochondria, not hypochondria. It's the person's mitochondria that are underperforming, so they're not providing the energy. So the person is not swinging the lead. They have to stay within their energy tolerance. And if you exceed it, they immediately pay the penalty of 2 or 3 days in bed. It's very important to work within their abilities, and that's the exact opposite of what doctors say. It's pull yourself together, get out there and do something, you'll soon get through this, is the worst thing that you can say to a person, because lactic acid which builds up in these low energy states is what causes the aches and pains. The person aches all over for a couple of days if they overdo it because of lactic acid buildup, and that all has to do with low energy states due to your mitochondria not really performing. But for some individuals, Rob, it gets really quite serious. A doctor called Arnold Peckerman, working at the National Institutes of Health here, looked at the symptoms of a lot of these people with post-viral fatigue syndrome, a breathlessness and their poor cardiac output. He suddenly realized these people are actually manifesting congestive cardiac failure. And when you start treating it that way, the person comes out of this a lot better. There's a condition called POTS, which stands for this horrible name, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. It just means when you stand up, your heart races. Why? Because the person's heart is already at peak performance. They're bordering on congestive cardiac failure. So when you stand up and need more blood to your head, the heart can't beat any stronger. It's already had it. So it has to beat faster to get the blood supply up to your head. So POTS is one of those really quite characteristic syndromes that characterizes this, this particular condition. And Peckerman actually came up with something called a Q score, which has to do with impedance. You put electrical sensors on the chest, and if the impedance rises to a certain point, the person is practically on the blink of cardiac failure. The trick then is use treatments to get the impedance down. The lower the impedance, the better the cardiac flow. So it's all become terribly scientific. This is in the book. I'm not sure if it'll stick in a discussion like this, but, it's in the book, and it's important for people who are suffering from this to realize it's not all in the mind, even that if that's what you're being told. There is science behind this and things that you can do.
Yeah.
Now, long COVID, as you rightly pointed out, is very much like this. But there's this extra complication of the spike protein. You remember back in the early days, the lying pharmacy people said they were, trotted out like shills on TVs to say it just stays where the injection site is. The spike protein doesn't go anywhere. Within weeks, we realized that was a lie, and spike protein was everywhere. It was in the brain, kidneys, heart, lungs, liver. It was widespread. And in fact, very dangerous. And that's the main problem, I think, with the vaccine idea. In theory, you could say it was a bit logical, but, to force the human body to make a protein that we don't naturally have or want or need, I think it's pretty silly anyway. But, what's now emerging, Rob, is this spike protein stuff is around years later. You can pick it up in the brain years later, and it causes inflammation and negative states like that. So there's no wonder these people are having, real trouble struggling along with the after effects of the COVID. And it's not just, after COVID, it's after vax now. I mean, it's actually entered the language, long COVID and long vax.
Yep.
People are being forced to admit the vaccination caused some of this, spreading all this spike protein throughout our bodies.
Yeah. Yeah, I see the same thing with patients. One of the things we ask when we onboard new patients now is we say, have you ever had COVID or the COVID vaccine? Because the effects seem to be very similar either way, one way or the other.
Yeah, yes, indeed. Anyway, so there's a lot to say about post-viral fatigue syndrome. And I put as much as I thought was useful in the book. And if you've got it, folks, you can deal with it. Don't listen to the doctor that says, it's all in your mind. Pull yourself together.
Yeah.
Their ignorance.
I think that's the important thing, right? Is to stay true to the fact that there is something you can do about it, and you've just got to know. You got to arm yourself with that knowledge. So I'll ask one more question, Keith, and then we'll call it an end there. But so what about red light therapy, photobiomodulation? What sort of effect does that have?
Well, that's tremendous. And, some of the science now to do with COVID and, knocking off cancer cells, it's a very, very fascinating specialty that's emerged just in the last 20. Let me just a quick history then, because it's relevant to what we see. A Hungarian called Andrei Mester was trying to cause skin cancers in rats so that he could study them. And he decided to use red laser light to damage the skin and get cancers. So he shaved the rats, shone the laser light, and boom, their hair grew back in no time. There was no sign of cancers or trouble. It emerged that these lasers were underpowered. I can't remember what the technical problem was, but they were grossly underpowered and weren't delivering what he thought. But they were delivering healing red light frequency. So it became christened low-level laser light. If I just say, well, it's not just lasers anymore, we've got LEDs and things. So low-level laser light therapy was not appropriate anymore. It got changed to photobiomodulation. But shining light on the body in various places, you can shine on the skull, it will pass into the skull, shine it on wounds and tissues, not unlike the way we project frequencies with the Avacia into the tissues, and you can modulate the biology of what's going on in the cells. And because the low intensity light is very healing instead of being very damaging, what's emerging is all kinds of wonderful things. So you can use it for, one of the striking things they're getting is good results with traumatic brain injuries, Parkinsonism, and dementias, which, dementia itself is a kind of brain injury, isn't it, if you think about it?
Yeah.
And it's enjoying huge popularity right now. And it's got antiviral properties. Like I said, I almost fell off my chair when I read that a couple of days ago, that it was able to knock out cancer cells in brain tumors. So, the future, because conventional therapy for brain tumors is a disaster. It costs the earth and doesn't work. Person's still dead within 3 months. Well, I'm talking about glioblastomas, of course. So, yes, yet another tool in the pursuit of viruses and getting rid of your virus. And it's something that, you can have something like that in your medicine cabinet too, having a Vaxia and an intranasal laser device or LED device. All this exciting stuff, every time we do a webinar, you usually hear me getting excited that this is what I consider to be Western energy medicine. The westernizing, I don't think it means a wishy-washy makeover of TCM, Chinese, acupuncture and things, or Ayurvedic medicine. It means our electronic technical brilliance. And it is yet a kind of energy healing, isn't it? Of course it is. Good note to finish then.
Absolutely. Awesome. So, all right. So thank you for joining us today, Keith. Lots of information, lots for people to digest. So I really appreciate you coming on. As always, it's a great conversation. I want to say to our audience, to make sure you connect with Keith, I'm going to leave all of his information for his website and everything on our podcast page. And pick up a copy of Virus Blitz, okay? I'm going to include the link on the website as well, painfreeforlife.com/podcast. I believe there's a second edition now, right, Keith?
Yeah, well, this is it's expanded. Listen, this is a work in progress. It's growing all the time.
Yeah.
So we're currently on the second edition. Of course, what I do if somebody's bought the earlier edition and I produce a new section, I email everybody anyway. So It's like being in a club and you're kept up to date.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. That's perfect. So yes, definitely grab a copy of the book. It's kind of like, your treatment Bible for viruses. It's something that you should have on your bookshelf. You should get a copy today. You can get ebooks, you can get print versions, you can get both, right? You can have an ebook and a print. So you got all those different options. So again, thanks for joining us today, Keith.
Great pleasure. As always, Rob. Thank you. Take care.
Right. Until next time, everyone, I'm Dr. Rob Vanbergen, and you're listening to Pain Free for Life.
Thanks for listening to Pain Free for Life. Be sure to follow us, share the show with family and friends, and leave us a review on iTunes. Every time you share the show, you are helping someone take their life back from pain. Visit painfreeforlife.com for more resources, including our free guides to microcurrent, the Hache protocol and inflammation, as well as our blog and online community full of people just like you, successfully overcoming all kinds of chronic and extreme conditions to live happy, productive, pain-free lives forever. And stay tuned for the next episode of Pain Free for Life.